I want to spend a few minutes talking about integrating 3D assets into a Unity environment. At this point, we're ready to start adding some additional content. I'm going to hit the play button, and you can see that I've already introduced my coin model, and I can't really interact with this coin at this point. I can pass right through it. I just run right through it, so I can run into it, pass right through it, and nothing's happening. Well, to contrast that, I'm going to build a game object, create other, and I'm going to introduce a cube into the equation. And I'll move this cube closer to the ground. I can start to see it's intersecting with the ground here, so I'll just leave it right there. And I'll hit the play button. Any object that's created in Unity, you can see when I approach it, or at least any 3D geometry, when I bump into it, I can't pass through it. So I can pass through the coin, but I can't pass through the geometry that's created inside Unity. And the reason for that is, if I select this cube and I look over here at the components, you can see that there's a box collider component that by default, we generate content in Unity. It comes with this thing called a box collider. If I grab my coin FBX and I look for that same component here, it lacks a collider. Now we can fix that, but I want to share with you a little bit of workflow about creating content in Cinema 4D and then integrating it back into the Unity 3D game environment. I'll just jump into Cinema 4D here really quickly. I'm going to create a cube, and this is just going to be just a real quick reference person. So I just want to use this as a real quick scale reference. So I'm making this 200 centimeters or 2 meters tall and 50 wide and 50 deep. So this will be my relative scale. This is relative to my first person camera object. So now when I create an object, and let's say I want to create a wall or a bridge or some kind of object that I want to interact with, first of all, I got a sense of the scale that I'm creating this object at. So if I make this object huge, I could say, boy, that's a heck of a lot bigger than what I really wanted, because here's my little reference. It's huge. The object's too big. So the bridge is too big or the wall is too big. Whatever this object is, I'll just bump it down to 500 by 500 by 500. This object, I'm just quickly going to do a real quick file save as. I'll call this test, or maybe I'll call it wall. And I'll save this as part of a wall object. Now, I can get rid of my first person reference here. I'll just delete that object. Now I've already saved my model, so now I can start to apply some textures to it. And I'll just browse and find the sandstone texture. Cinema 4D is warning me that it's outside the search path of the project, so I just told Cinema 4D to copy the texture for me into the search path of this project. So it moved it into a text folder in the same folder that this file exists, so inside my models folder. I'll just drag and drop that material onto my object. I'll save what I'm working on. And again, this is the Cinema 4D file inside my models folder inside my island project. And so what I'll do is I'll just do a real quick manual export as an FBX, and I'll save this directly into my models directory. I'll let everything default. I'll say OK. And I'll jump back into Unity. And because all of that content was in the search path, when I go over to the models folder, you can see I now have my wall object. This other wall object, this is the Cinema 4D file that didn't get converted because, again, I'm encountering a little bit of a bug with the student version, or the free educational version. I'll just drag this object out, and I can immediately see that I'm pretty much the same relative scale according to the first-person camera that I modeled in Cinema 4D. So I have this big object. The textures came in with it. I'll hit the play button, and I see my object, and I can just run right up to it. And in fact, I can pass straight through it, which is not at all what I want. In fact, you can see that the object disappears, and while I'm inside it, it looks like it's no longer there. And that's just for efficiency's sake. Unity and pretty much all game engines will only render the normal side of the geometry, or the positive side or the upside of the geometry. So when we're looking at a 3D object, there's a normal direction, and typically the normals are pointed out to the things that receive the materials, and it does not render the backside of geometry. So in the event that you model something in Cinema 4D and you import it and it's missing some polygons, chances are its normals were flipped, and there's a process that you can go through to flip the normals back all in the right way. So if we encounter that, we'll fix that problem as we go. But I want to focus on the primary issue of this object. I can't interact with it yet. And the way that we can fix this, there's a couple of different ways that we could apply a collider to the object. The first way is on import. And what I can do is I can look inside my assets folder, inside my models folder, and I can click on the file that's been imported. And when I look at this, I have all these different options that happen at import. And you can see here that under the model tab, there's an optimized mesh, and just underneath that it says generate colliders. And if I check that, and I have to apply it, once I check it and apply it, that model re-imports. I can delete the model that I have on stage. Actually, let me back up. Let me see if that applied the collider to the existing object. I don't think it did. I think I have to replace it. Nope, it updated. So it dynamically updated that collider so that instance of the model did in fact inherit the collider. So now when I hit play, I can no longer pass through the object. So bam, I bump into it. Now for some reason, if I decided I wanted to turn that collider off, I would just go back to the actual model, the actual asset, the FBX. I'll go find the generate colliders, I'll uncheck that, I'll hit apply, I'll hit the play button again, and now I should be able to pass right through this object. There we go. There's one other way that we can apply a collider to an existing object. Now remember, I just turned off the collider, so I toggled between importing the colliders at the time of import, and right now I've turned that back off, so this is the default state coming from Cinema 4D. There's another way that I could add a collider just to this instance of this model, and what I can do is I got to make sure that my simulation isn't running. I'll select my object, in this case it's the wall object, and with it selected, I can go into the Components pull-down menu, I can look under the Physics menu and choose to add a box collider. What this is doing is it's going to add a component to this object. Let me just choose it, box collider, and over here now we have the box collider component that's been applied to that object. When I hit the play button and I go back over and try to walk through this object, I'll kind of run right into it. Okay, don't quite bounce off of it, but I do run into it, and I can't pass through it. So those are just a couple of the methods to add colliders to geometry that you import from Cinema 4D or any other program that's outside of Unity. So what's so important about colliders? We'll talk about that in the next presentation.